strife. Seek another soul, this little paper deity. Let's go and flash the plastic, blow it all on hot girls and wheels. Let's do something drastic. In the morning we'll never feel. Where were you on Black Wednesday? Stood for hours outside the Northern Rock. Still hungover from Tuesday. Must we take this banker's cross? In God we trust. Set us on the bill. From boom to bust. Make it a thrill. Make it steal your life. Dominate your goals. Make trouble and strife. Seek another soul. This little paper deity.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the show. And it's 18th of February, 17th of February for you guys, 18th of February for me, 2019, and I'm Jonny, Lipsham Most of you already know that, but if you're new to the show, you may not. So, good evening. You're gonna have to excuse me. A lot of you will know I've not been very well the last 2 or 3 weeks. And neither of my kids, and neither is my wife. We've all been pretty poorly the last 2 or 3 weeks or so. There's been nausea, there's been migraines, there's been coughs, colds, the works. And just as soon as I had kind of got up out of bed yesterday and not yesterday, day before, and felt absolutely fine. Today I'm kind of back feeling under the weather again. I have a cough, which is bloody annoying. to say the least, because I have vocal sessions and stuff to do this week. So not just for my own stuff, but for other clients as well. I've got some backing vocals that I need to do for a couple of clients for their records. And having this kind of a throat is not boding very well for singing anything useful. So you're going to have to bear with me, guys, because I'm probably going to cough and splutter my way through the show tonight. So I apologize in advance, but it's very, very good to see everybody. And Sam Lewis says, good morning from Bangkok. Bangkok is awesome. My parents were there many, many years ago, and they loved it. I mean, we're talking the 70s. During the Vietnam War period, they were there, and they absolutely loved Bangkok. And my mother has been back since the end of the war. She's been back, and she still loves it. So there you go, Bangkok, beautiful place. But that is awesome that right here in my little room, it's not little anymore, is it? It's much bigger than it was. But right here from my room here in the southeastern suburbs of Edinburgh in Scotland in the United Kingdom, I'm being watched by somebody in Bangkok. That's pretty awesome. When I first started getting into mixing, I never imagined that I'd be doing a live show, and I never imagined that I'd be being watched by people all over the world. Bangkok, Australia, Germany, I know we have here, and we have a good number of states of the United States of America here, and I think we've got Canadians here as well, or at least we have had. And She Studios, that's my good friend Sheila. She says, feel better. I'm so glad I got through my illness. Yeah, well, this one is really annoying me now. It's been going on, feels like it's been going on forever. And I'm fed up to the back teeth of it, frankly. And Mike is here. My good friend Mike Neighbor from Peace Valley Audio. I was chatting to him earlier, which is always very cool. Mike and I chat almost every day, which is very cool. We get on extremely well, and I'm very glad of his friendship. So thank you, Mike, for coming into the show this evening. Now, I believe we already have a question. Somebody posted a question much earlier this evening, about 4 hours ago, I think it was, just to get that question in before everybody else, and that's cool. So we are going to address this, since it is the first question, but we're not going to jump into questions right away. But the question is, Jonny, your thoughts on miking, recording, and mixing brass instruments, so EQ, compression considerations, and that kind of thing. So yes, we will address that. We absolutely will address that question. Please remind me, folks, that I need to do that, because he really, what's the name of the guy? It was Max 16 something. I didn't really read the number, but his name is Mac. Mac, if you're still watching, if you're here and you're in the show tonight, I am going to address your question. Folks in the chat, please make sure that I do, because I know that there will be lots of questions here tonight, hopefully. We better schnapps for the pipe security irritant. Yeah, I don't drink that stuff, but thanks, Chris. Thanks for the recommendation. Kirk says, my sympathies. We've been battling the flu en masse over here as well. It's been a couple of weeks and still dealing with this cough. Yeah, I think, Kirk, you and I maybe have the same thing going on here. It would certainly make sense. There is a pretty nasty strain of flu that's going around the world at the moment, and this may well be it. Apparently, it is even immune to the flu vaccine. If you are one of those people that has the flu vaccine, my wife is one, because she works in healthcare, so she has to have it. Apparently, this strain of flu is currently immune to the current vaccine. But I do believe that there are folks working on updating the vaccine to include this particular strain so that we can nuke it. So yeah, the cough is the worst. Yes, it is, absolutely. It's fecking annoying. But there we go, and I didn't swear there. I said feck, which is an Irish word, for those of you that don't know that. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about tonight? Those of you that got my email that I sent out earlier today, you'll have the heads up already. We're going to be talking about something called complementary EQ. which doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as complimentary drinks on in-flight service. Not quite the same thing. However, what we're basically talking about here is doing opposite EQ moves to make two tracks sit well together, particularly if you are checking your mix in mono, which I hope you are. Even if you're not actually mixing in mono, I hope you're actually checking your mix in mono to make sure that it is mono compatible and that you can still hear all of the elements of your mix in mono. Really, really important. The reason being is that if your end user, the end listener, is listening to the song that you've mixed and they put it on their stereo or their Bluetooth speaker, and then let's say their Bluetooth speaker is in the corner of the lounge, and then they go through into the kitchen to go make coffee or whatever, or to make dinner or to get a snack. As they walk away and listen, while still listening, when they get into the kitchen, by the time the audio from the Bluetooth speakers bounced around the room and off of all the surfaces, the walls, the windows and everything else, by the time it gets to your ears, it likely has already collapsed to mono. Such is the nature of, rebounding frequencies, and they may well go out of phase with each other, and so what you end up with is a mono sound anyway. So you want your mix to maintain its integrity, whether the listener is in one corner, opposite corner of the room, or in a completely different room. You still want the integrity of your mix to hold together, and this is why either mixing in mono or regularly checking your mix in mono is crucial. If you start to find that you lose elements of your mix when you hit the mono button, and maybe something disappears, or something that was nice and up front suddenly gets quite a bit buried, then you know that you need to keep working at the EQ of those elements to get them to come through a bit more and to be separated in mono. Now, the best way to do that is actually to keep your Studio One session in mono and work on the EQ until both of those elements are now separated and can be clearly distinguished and clearly heard. And then when you hit the stereo button, the byproduct is that those elements will sound even better. If they sound great in mono, they'll sound even better in stereo. So that's kind of where we're going with this tonight. Martin Weeks is here. He says, great, by the time they get the vaccine, it'll have run its course. It might have. Who knows? Deer Creek says, if you cover one ear, does anybody use that to check mono? Yeah, that's hilarious. My guitar leads, Slate in chorus, always disappear in mono. Most think that that's for the best. That's funny. Chris, you're hilarious. Anyone ever told you may well have a gift for comedy and possibly even a promising career in that sector of the entertainment industry? My mother is a comedian. She's hilarious. She's so funny. She's she's one of these people that's kind of like an all-round entertainer. So she's a singer. She's a terrific singer. She's a dancer, former ballet dancer with the Royal National Ballet, but also did a lot of contemporary dance and choreography. But she's also a hilarious comedian. She's very, very funny. Regularly has us in collapsing on the floor laughing. So I know a little bit about comedy. Rainer says, always mixing in mono after the rough mix and before the finish. 75% of work in mono. Yeah. Well, you know what? It's actually a good thing to do, because the byproduct is, if your mix sounds great in mono, by the time you open out to stereo again and all of your panning takes its effect, your mix is going to take on a lot more breadth and depth because of it, because all of your elements are going to be much more separated than they were via EQ. It does take a little bit more work. It takes a bit more effort, maybe probably takes a little bit more time as well. But you know what? It's a good investment. It's a good investment. Now, obviously, we're not mixing for mono. Just because we mix in mono does not mean that we are mixing for a mono result. We're not. We're mixing for a stereo product. because, that's what we listen in. Ever since stereo was invented, we do everything in stereo. I mean, heck, we do things in quadraphonic sound now, and even bigger than quadraphonic sound. 5 to 1, 7 to 1, 9 to 1, 15, 21 to 1 sound. We do all of that now. So really, the options are limitless now. But since stereo was invented, that's how we listen. We listen in stereo. But does that mean we shouldn't mix in mono because the end product is going to be in stereo? No. We mix in mono to enable us to get a better stereo mix, because it means that we have to work harder at the EQ and the compression to get things better separated. So anyway, this really wasn't about a discussion on mixing in mono, although it's kind of part of it. It really is. Using mono to do this kind of complementary EQ thing is the best way to do it, personally. So what does it look like? It's actually, the principle of it is really simple. I'm going to scoot over to Studio One, and I'm going to show you how this works in principle by taking a look at this song here. This is the song that you heard in the intro. This is Paper Deity from my 2016 EP Belonging to Tomorrow. And speaking of EPs, I am working on a new one which will be released sometime this year, probably around about the autumn time. That's kind of where I'm aiming for, late summer, early autumn. So I've got a bunch of new songs that I'm working on for that. Going in quite a bit of a different direction to what you've just heard. It should be quite different. Yowza, look at all that high pass. Yeah, I've done a fair amount of high passing. But as you can see, there are tracks that have nothing on them, like these backing vocals have literally no plugins on them at all. And then the Rhodes just has a saturation knob just to get some grit into it, and we got a little bit of EQ on this guy on the Hammond. If I expand that, you can see that as well. So there's a fair amount of high pass filtering. But it's when we get over into my busing system, because this is really where my mix comes together. My mix comes together here, by and largely. So as you can see, a fair amount of high pass filtering, and yet when you listen to the mix, it doesn't sound thin. It still sounds fulsome because I have not overdone the high pass filtering. There was a school of thought. I think there probably still is a school of thought about high pass filtering. There are kind of two extremes. One is that you high pass everything apart from anything that is a low pitched instrument like a bass or a kick drum, and you high pass everything else up to about 100 hertz. And then there's the opposite extreme, which is you don't high pass at all. I kind of sit maybe a little bit in the middle. I high pass a lot. But does that mean I high pass everything? No. Doesn't. It means I high pass where I need to in order to make room for the kick drum and the bass to come through. But I'm certainly not going to high pass everything up to 100. I mean, some of the high pass filters you can see here are, they're not anywhere near 100. That one is, that one is, that one isn't, that one's way higher. But really it's all about making room for other lower elements to come through, particularly if you have a very large, very round sounding kick drum or a very large round sounding bass. And things like Hammond organs, Fender Rhodes, they have a lot of low end in them by nature. So you want to make room for those without clouding everything else out. So that's kind of why I make extensive use of high-pass filtering. How does this complementary thing work? Well, we're going to focus on these two guitar tracks. So what do we have? We have a tremolo guitar, and we have a Les Paul guitar that doesn't have a tremolo on it. It does have a delay on it. So these two guitars are fairly different in that they're doing different things, but they're also all going through the same amp sim. So they're both going through Ampire. So the thing with that is, even if you've got two different guitars, say you've got a Telecaster on the one hand and you've got a Les Paul custom on the other hand. So you've got two guitars that sound pretty different. But then you still run them through the same amp, and maybe you mic the amps in exactly the same way. Maybe you've only got the one amp, so you don't really have that much of a choice. Well, you could dial in each amp each time you record, or you could kind of leave the amp kind of set in something that is pleasing, knowing that you're going to kind of tailor and customize it when you get to the mixing phase. That's not to say that we're talking about fixing it in the mix. We're talking about making sure that these guys are kind of separated from each other. Okay, so let's have a listen to these two guitars on their own, and you'll see that they're actually quite different. And then you'll see kind of what I've done. In fact, you can probably just visually already, you can see that the EQs are different. There's a boost here and there's a cut in the same spot. There's a cut here and there's a boost in the roughly the same ballpark area. That's essentially what complementary EQ is you're just making space. Deer Creek says EDM kick drum JL is coming around. Perfect. Not quite yet. Alright, so let's listen to these two guitars. Okay, so what you could hear is that they were both completely different guitar parts, and they were both playing at largely different times. So this kind of idea of complementary EQ is maybe marginally, only slightly redundant here in this particular example. However, there is sufficient overlap between the voicings on the two guitars and sufficient overlap where they are playing ever so slightly at the same time. This is maybe a little bit more evident when we get to the chorus of the song. There's a bit more overlap here. Now, I've panned these out pretty wide from each other. So you're probably thinking, hey, that's all the separation I need. I just need to pan them away from each other and there'll be no more kind of conflict or tension. However, let's shove this into mono by hitting this button here. And now let's listen to these two guitars again. Okay, so they're playing exactly the same voicings, just slightly in a slightly different way. So they're kind of sitting largely on top of each other. Now, if I take these EQs away, and you can see kind of like how this complementary EQ helps in this particular example. So without the EQs, let's listen in. So they're kind of pretty on top of each other and getting in each other's way a bit. So let's bring them in. Let's take them out again. Alright, so in mono you can clearly hear, or at least I can anyway, I don't know about you guys, but you can hear that when these EQs are disengaged, that they fight each other because they're playing the same voicings, they're in the same frequency area, albeit, the playing manner in each guitar is different. But as soon as I engage these EQs, both of them gain some brightness that they didn't have before. And that's because I've given one some boost and one some cut in the same spot. So they're kind of away from each other. Let me open these guys up, and we'll park that one over there, and we'll park this one. Come here. Sit. Stay. Okay, there we go. So here's a little bit of a better look at the EQ. So we've got the tremolo guitar, which is kind of like the more kind of picking style guitar with kind of arpeggios and that kind of thing going on. And then we've got the more rhythmic kind of thing going on in this track over here. So you can see the high pass is set to 84 here, whereas on the other one it's set to 243. So I've cleared out a lot more low end from this guy. And then I've got this boost here around about 1.5. And I'm cutting at more or less the same spot. There's a little dip out here. And I'm boosting in more or less the same spot here as well. So, and then there's a little bit of a high shelf on both of these guitars, again in a slightly different spot. So that's really all that is meant really by, that's really all that's meant by complementary EQ, is that you EQ to complement each other. So now that we've established this in mono, that now these two guitars sound a bit more clearly defined and less on top of each other. So when we switch out to stereo, they sound even better. Just bypass EQs. Okay, so this is all the complementary EQ is designed to do. It's just designed to make way for, it's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. I've got these two pieces that I want to kind of interlock with each other so that they sound good together as a unit, and they sound good together whether in mono or in stereo. So that essentially is all this is about. It's a really simple principle. But it's incredibly helpful, and it'll help deal with muddiness in your mix, and it'll help solve that problem of things collapsing when you put your mix into mono, which is something you really don't want to do. Some of it can be due to phase. You might discover that the bigger issue is to do with phase when you put something in mono and you lose a track. Worst example I've heard of that is there was a rap song that was out in the public domain. I think it got into like the top 20 maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, and it sounded really good. The vocal was really, really incredibly upfront and in your face, and I thought, wow, this vocal is incredibly crystal clear, and really felt like it was slapping me silly around the face. So then you bring it in to Studio One, you put it into mono, and suddenly the vocal just disappeared, and it didn't take me too long to work out the reason for that was because the layered vocal tracks that had been done to create this big fat in your face vocal sound were not in phase. So the vocal disappeared as soon as you hit the mono button, and I thought, oh, that's not so good, that's not so great. But yeah, so it just goes to show that even mixes that are out there in the public domain that are being consumed by listeners on their earbuds today can have major mixing flaws in them. So there you go. So yeah, so that's complementary EQ in a nutshell. So I hope that has been helpful to you guys. I'm going to go back over to the lounge. Hello. And I'm going to go and check in the chat and see what you guys have been talking about. Can you turn the EQ off to hear what they sound like? Yep, done that. Decry says, I find putting sheet music in front of the other guitar player always makes for extra room. And then I can pan to the middle. Very funny. Could you sidechain the tremolo guitar using the rhythmic guitar, sidechain the EQ? That would be a unique approach. Yes, you could certainly do it like that. You could duck one behind the other. You could. But when you collapse the song to mono, isn't that going to create a problem? You're still going to have the EQ problem not solved. If it is indeed an EQ problem, that's meaning the two guitars are masking each other. If there are common frequencies in each of the guitars, then it could well be it's the EQ that's the issue, that one is masking the other, especially when you collapse the mix to mono. So even if you've got one side chained to the other, I don't think you're necessarily going to completely, you might help, but I don't think necessarily you'd completely eradicate the issue until you deal with the EQ, where the frequencies are fighting each other. So that's kind of what I would say to that. Take from that what you will. But Chris, you're on form tonight, buddy. My ears are dead to any adjustments under 6 dB. I unfortunately couldn't hear much difference, but the method is spot on, especially for making lead vocals cut through. Yeah, definitely with lead vocals, this is absolutely paramount to making your lead vocal cut through. It isn't actually the only strategy I would use on for lead vocal, but it's definitely, like, if you've got a lead vocal and a double vocal, particularly in the chorus, like this song has a doubled up vocal in the chorus. Having a different EQ, even if it's a different EQ curve or a different EQ type, can make a big difference. You know, maybe I would use, I don't know, maybe I would use a stock EQ on the double, and then on the lead vocal, I use something with a little bit more vibe to it, like maybe a Neve EQ or something like that, or an SSL. That gives it a little bit of a different color. That would help, even if you're using the same kind of EQ curve on the two channels. That would definitely go some way to helping with the lead vocal. But I would also do parallel processing as well, if you really want the vocal to be right up front. Parallel processing, in terms of either parallel EQ or parallel compression, can get you a long way to having a vocal that's really, really up front. Automation as well will help with that. But yes, certainly complementary EQ, especially between your backing vocals. If, like in this case, I've stacked my own vocals, so it's my voice into the same mic 4 times over. There's a perfect example of where complementary EQ would really, really help separate those BVs out, because it's me 4 times over into the same microphone. You know, kind of there is going to be a frequency build up. So definitely get into those BVs and do some complementary EQs. Separate the higher ones from the lower ones. You know, that kind of thing. Maybe even different compression settings as well would help separate them even further. So yeah, good suggestion there. Ken says, how are you deciding what frequency to boost and or cut? Are you focusing on fundamental frequencies or splitting the range of frequencies? Usually when I'm doing complementary EQ, I'm focusing on where there are conflict points. So if I hear that there's, you know, that one guitar is masking the other in the mid-range, maybe the upper mid-range, maybe kind of like that 700 through to 1.5K kind of area. If there is some crossover there, then I'm gonna listen to each one individually and decide which one I'm gonna boost and which one I'm gonna cut. And it might actually be just an arbitrary choice. It might come down to it. Like in this particular case, it was a case of I just had to pick one. I knew where the areas of conflict were, and I just needed to pick one and do the opposite move on one guitar. But you know, kind of part of what dictated that decision was what role is each guitar playing in this song. So the Les Paul guitar is much more rhythmic. So I thought, okay, it's much more rhythmic. It probably deserves to have a little more of the brightness than the tremolo guitar, which is doing the kind of more complementary, slow arpeggios and, picking patterns. So I kind of figured that's probably the one that probably needs to be in the background a little bit more. So that's the one that could probably be cut a little bit. So, I could sacrifice a little bit because it doesn't have necessarily as much an upfront role as the other guitar. So those are kind of things that would guide your decision making about which EQ is going to get the boost and which EQ is going to get the cut in that same kind of area. So yeah, think about the role that those instruments are playing in the song as well as in the mix to help guide those decisions, is what I would say to that. Steve Louth is here. He says, just got back from a weekend of gigs playing with some of my old band members. Well, that's wonderful, Steve. Hope you had a great time. Dickory says, collapse to mono. Something the same as the EQ only happens when being sidechained. Yeah, if I was using sidechain, which I'm not in this case. Jeffrey Bell says, how about the low end of the spectrum? My bass is always too loud all the way up to the project page. Any advice? If your bass end is too loud, that could be down to the space that you are working in. So your listening environment, your mixing environment. Is your room treated or not treated? Or, the dimensions of the room could be sufficient that actually what you end up with is your room is essentially lying to you about how much bass there is in the room. So then when you go to the mastering phase and you've reached what you think is the end of your mix and you're ready to master it, and you suddenly go, oh, hang on a minute, there's way too much bass in here. There's too much bass in this mix. How to tame it? I would say reference. And I don't necessarily mean using a reference track. I mean using a different set of speakers or headphones or something. Like in both my rooms of late, like the last sort of 10 years or so, my previous room and this room, I check my low end with these guys, actually, and then I check them again with a set of earbuds. And they pretty much tell me if there's too much bass going on, particularly the headphones, because the speakers will give me quite a lot of low end, but then I have to remember that the low end is also going to be building up in the corners. And yes, this isn't a treated room, but it's not perfectly treated yet. I basically put up the treatment from my old room, so I know that I've got some way to go in terms of finishing the treatment of this room. So I know for a fact that in this room there is still a degree to which the room is lying to me. So when it's coming out of the speakers ambiently, I may think, hey, there's actually not enough bass. I don't hear very much. I mean, I do, but comparatively, I don't hear too terribly much low end in my mix. Rather than going and grabbing that bass fader and turning it up, or doing something weird like stacking compressors on the bass or something like that. Instead of doing that, what I would do is I would check it on a pair of headphones or check it on another set of speakers. Like I'll maybe do the car test at that point. And the car test will quickly tell me, maybe the first 2 seconds of the song will tell me, yay, way too much bass. Or, not enough bass. I can go back into the room and I can turn it up a little bit. So there's that. So if the answer to your question is that it's the room, or the answer to your question is no, it's not the room, but I still struggle with managing the low end of my mix, what I would say is try... this is going to sound funny, but try high-pass filtering your bass. Yes, I did say high-pass filter the bass. Absolutely. roll that high pass filter up until your bass sounds really, really absurdly thin, and then slowly roll it back again until some of that girth comes back into the bass, and then stop before it gets too much. And try and find that balance point using a high pass filter. It's a little bit of a cheaty way of doing it, but it may well help out in the short term whilst you're building out the rest of the mix, and then you can kind of you can go back and you can address the low end of the bass guitar as it is. And also here's another good trick is and I can demonstrate this actually. Hang on a second, let me go back over here. Let's turn this solo off, and I'm going to go back onto the screen in a second. Don't panic, everybody. Let's go back over to Studio One. I can demonstrate that here. Here's another trick that I do, and I do this pretty regularly, just to kind of make sure that my bass is set right in the mix. I will play the chorus of the song, and what I'll do is I'll start with the bass as it is in the mix, and then I'll pull it back, and then I'll gradually fade it back in until I can hear it. And when I'm at that point where I can hear the bass, even if I'm just beginning to discern it, then I start to very, very precisely dial it in from that point. So this is another good way to check if you've got the bass right in the mix. So let's just play this chorus.
Says on the bill from blue bust,
okay, let's take it out.
Make them steal your life, dominate your goals, make a drop in strife, so you can love your soul against little paper dignity. Says on the bill from blue bust, make it thrill, make them steal your life.
Okay, so I dialed it right back, and actually I've ended up with the bass actually being a little bit softer than it was before. And yet to my ears here, now I know I'm working on headphones, but to me here, in these particular headphones, which have got a really, really good bass response, the bass doesn't sound overwhelming. It doesn't sound like it's fighting with the kick drum or fighting with the Fender Rhodes, because again, that's going to be an area where there's going to be a conflict, is the Fender Rhodes and the bass guitar, because they occupy similar amounts of frequency space. So, kind of the Fender Rhodes is going to take up the upper mids of the bass guitar. So, there's kind of an area there to be careful. Now, not everybody's going to have a Fender Rhodes in their mix. Some of you are going to have other synths, maybe, or you're going to have other guitars. So, you kind of need to bear those kind of things in mind. But that's a good thing to do. If you think, hey, am I happy with where the bass is? Just pull it right out the mix and then gradually dial it back up again until you park it where you want it. So certainly that is something to give a try. Try that one. Dickery says, going to run and feed the dogs. We'll get, let's see, good luck on the vocal session. Thank you very much. So Jeffrey, I hope that has helped you. Cassidy says, hi. Well, hi to you, Cassidy. I hope you're doing well and not giving your dad too much grief. Steve Lyle said, Sheila had to travel 300-mile round trip to play these gigs. Wow, 300 miles. Good grief. I don't tend to do gigs that are kind of like outside of a 120-mile radius unless the money is worth it, to be honest. How do you decide with background vocals? How do I decide what? I'm not entirely sure. SW, nice to see you. I think you're new to my show, so welcome. Welcome to my show, but I'm not entirely sure what your question means. How do I decide what with the background vocals? Not entirely sure. Enice43 is here and says, hi, good to see you. Brad Brown says, hey Brad, you made it. Good to see you, buddy. Welcome to the show, because I know you've kind of like been wanting to be in the show off and on for a wee while, so I'm glad you're here. You said, so you mentioned the car test. Why not just mix in the car? You've always said no to that. Well, you know what? I know people that have done that. They have actually mixed their songs in the car. They've actually literally taken their laptop into the car and plugged the laptop into the hi-fi system of the car. See that there are issues with that. Now, you might think because of the dimensions of the car and because of the way the car is designed and built that, there is going to be some degree of acoustic deadening in the car. So you're kind of thinking, hey, this is going to be an ideal environment because this is where a lot of people are going to be listening to their music, right? Mixing the environment that people are going to be listening to. Surely. Not entirely. See, you need to mix in an environment that is actually as frequency neutral as possible. So your room needs to have the flattest possible response. Now, not everybody's room is going to have that. Every room is going to have issues because we are working in bedrooms, we are working in lounges, we are working in a variety of different home environments. This is why this is all about home studio stuff. So these rooms, like this room that I'm in here, this is the master bedroom of the house. It's not designed to be a mixing and mastering room or a recording room. It just isn't designed for that. There are parallel walls, there are parallel floor and ceiling, there's coving, there's all sorts of shapes and things in the room that are going to cause acoustic problems. Every room is going to have a room node, which is a particular resonant frequency of the room. This room is pitched in B flat. My previous room was pitched in A flat, even though it was quite considerably smaller. It was more to do with kind of like the actual parallel nature of the walls and the fact that the floor ceiling ratio to the walls was a particular mathematical balance, which meant that room was in A flat, whereas this one's in B flat and it's quite a lot bigger. This is just simply the room resonant frequency of this room. It's just, it's that thing. It doesn't have the same, it's a little bit higher actually. The roof is a little bit higher than it was in my other room. And obviously this is a much bigger room, kind of width-wise and length-wise. So it has a different room node. Every room kind of does. You can find that by, maybe taking your guitar or something into the center of your room. If your room doesn't have any treatment on the walls or anything like that, then, start playing some notes on the guitar until you find a note that really just kind of explodes in the room. That's your room node. That's your the mode of your room. That's that one particular frequency of your room that really jumps out. And that's kind of where you need to do some fairly critical treatment in your room. So I hope that's helpful. Steve says, I've always double-tracked my guitars with different stages of gain. I'll probably do 4 if it's a clean tone or a high gain, but I spend time on getting the guitar tones. Yeah, absolutely right. Get it right at the source. Every time, get it right at the source. It will save you a lot of time and effort on the mixing front. If you can get this kind of complementary EQ thing happening at the front end with the way you dial in your guitar tones, do it. Absolutely. Because it means you won't need to do it in the mixing phase, or at least you'll hardly need to do it. You'll maybe need to do it just a smidge, and it'll save you a lot of time in the mixing phase. Absolutely, that's the best thing. Couldn't load the website. It's called Uleen Loudness Meter. I don't know what that's all about. Martin says, question for later in the stream. I believe either you or Johnny Guy hipped me to this loudness meter. I use it all the time now in conjunction with the level meter. The only loudness meter that I really recommend, and I don't actually have it as yet, but it's the loudness. There's a couple of loudness meters that my good friend Ian Shepherd makes. One is the Dynameter, which is really, really good. Really, really fantastic at measuring the dynamic range of your music and making sure and helping you actually to attain a good dynamic range in your music without sacrificing, kind of commercial loudness, so to speak. And then he also has the Perception plugin, which is all about loudness management. And it's really, really good. Both of those plugins I heartily recommend. And you can go to Ian's website, productionadvice.co.uk, to go and check those out there. He's got direct links on his website to those two plugins. Those are the ones I really recommend, because I know Ian well, and I know that anything that he comes out with that is really going to be a massive benefit to everybody. As I say, I don't have it yet. It's not because I don't endorse it, because I do. I endorse those two plugins. I just haven't had the chance to go get them yet. But I do heartily commend those plugins to you for loudness management and dynamic range. They are the best in the business, in my opinion. Working basements. Okay, cool. Let's see. Brad says, as I mentioned prior, I am not getting any separation. I am in mono somehow, but what buttons do I click? Seems I have a culprit somewhere and I cannot pan my tracks. Maybe show a screenshot where to look. And yes, howdy from Texas. Okay, yeah, we can quickly do that. I still want to get to Mac's question, which was the one at the very start of the show. I still want to get to that. So let's quickly just do this one for Brad. So Brad, in the demonstration, I don't know if you saw it, where we were doing some complementary EQ, I put Studio One into mono mode, and there are a couple of places you can do it. You can do it either right here on the master fader here, or you can do it down the bottom here in the transport bar next to this little bit here. If you click there, it goes red. When it goes red, you are in mono, and as you can see, it's reflected up in the master fader as well. It now glows bright red. It didn't used to. In Studio One 3, it was just kind of like this, but up there, and it was really quite hard to see. But if you're in Studio One 4, it now is pretty glaringly obvious that you are in mono. So if you click that, now it goes back to the 2 circles instead of the 1. So the 1 and bright red, that's mono, and that one is stereo. Some interfaces also have a mono mode. My one does. As you can see, I can hit this button here, and it'll put the whole thing into mono. Bobby Booth with the $5 donation. Thank you very much, buddy. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. That's very cool. So yeah, I can hit this button here, and it puts it into mono at the interface level. So you might want to check there, Brad, if you've got one of those interfaces with a mono button on it, just make sure that button is not engaged. If these are set as stereo, like I have them here, this is how they default, by the way. If they default like this and you still are in mono and you can't hear any of your panning, check at your interface level that you've not gone into mono somehow. Or if you have a monitor station like I do, or something like it, like the Mackie Big Knob or something like that, there is a mono button on both of those devices, I'm pretty certain. Certainly the monitor station, there definitely is one. Make sure that button is not engaged, because that will make your mix mono as it is as well. And so those are places you can go look to see if you can fix your mono problem. Okay, let's go back. Steve Line says, do you know where I can get a great rock organ plugin? There's a great couple of rock organ samples in Presence XT. You can go check those out. And with the rotary plugin as well, combine the two together and you should get yourself a great Hammond organ sound. Other than that, I'm not really sure about free ones. I know Native Instruments do one as part of the complete bundle, I'm pretty sure. And there's one called B4, which I used maybe 15 years ago. I don't know whether anybody still makes that anymore. But yes, that's another one to look out for. But that, again, I don't think is free either. So let's go back up the top to Mac's question. I'm just going to quickly scroll all the way back up, and we'll get Mac's question, and we'll wrap this up very soon. Mac 1651, if you're still here, I'm going to deal with your question now, and we'll kind of finish the show on this. And I'm happy to run over by just a few minutes to deal with this. Okay, so you said that you wanted my thoughts on miking, recording, and mixing brass instruments, EQ, and compression considerations. Okay, miking brass instruments. Brass instruments are loud. So if you're going to use a condenser microphone like this one, I would suggest that either on your preamp level or on the mic itself, if it has one, engage a 10 dB pad. What does the 10 dB pad do? The 10 dB pad attenuates the signal going into the microphone or into the preamp by 10 dB. How is that helpful, you're probably going to ask? Well, what that does is it helps prevent overloads. So that's what that does. It prevents overloads so that your signal doesn't go absolutely berserk into the converters in your interface, and then you don't get a horrible sounding track when you're recording. So that's the first thing. Second thing, so that's condenser mics. You can mic with a condenser mic, but I would say don't mic too close with a condenser mic. Let's say you're working with trumpets, for example. I would want the bell of the trumpet to be maybe 18 inches away from the mic capsule itself. And particularly if you're dealing with something like one of these guys, the Rode NT1A, this doesn't have a pad on it, so you're going to have to see about having one at the input level on your interface. If the interface doesn't have a pad, then you're going to have to find some other way to do that. And I think there are boxes you can get, little preamp boxes you can get that will do that for you. Or some kind of attenuator somewhere in the signal chain. If you're dealing with dynamic mics like an SM57 or an SM58, those are great. Either will get the sound that you want. The dynamic mic you can afford to get a little bit closer up to the instrument with than the condenser mic. Now, what I might recommend is maybe doing both. Have a condenser mic and a dynamic mic and blend the two signals together. But if you're going to do the two miking option, you're going to have to make sure that you keep the mics in phase so you don't have phase issues in recording. And then you have to go and get something like auto align to align the two together to correct the phase. So that would be a miking consideration. Don't get too close unless you're using a dynamic mic, because you don't want to overload the microphone. And again, don't record too hot. Nobody needs to record anything too hot, in my opinion. So don't record too hot. You could also maybe try a mixture of close and distance miking, maybe to get some room ambience as well as another option to consider. Like particularly if you're recording, let's say you're recording a brass band. Well, you would want to do a combination of close miking, i.e. direct mics, like condenser mics, or, dynamic mics, close mic on each individual instrument, and then maybe you would want to room mic or overhead mic with some condenser mics or some ribbon mics. Something like that you could certainly do. And then it would be a question of then blending the direct and the indirect mics together to create your sound. And then as for EQ, remember brass instruments, because they're made out of brass, they're going to have some inherent frequencies that are more prominent than others. So if you're dealing with lots of trumpets, or if it's a brass band situation, you're dealing with different cornets, you're dealing with soprano cornets, you're dealing with regular cornets, you may have 5, 6, 7 cornets to deal with. Obviously, they are very, very similar EQ-wise, just in their tonality, just in the design of the instrument and the sound that they produce. So complementary EQ is going to be your best friend, and then compression as well. I can't really advise too much on compression or EQ too terribly much, because it depends upon your situation. It depends upon what you're recording and the scenario that you're recording in, and it also depends upon the material that you are recording. If you're recording a funk horn section, it's going to be different to recording a brass band. Okay, so Salvation Army style brass band, you're going to EQ and compress very, very differently for those different scenarios. So those are things to bear in mind. EQ is going to be your friend if it's a Salvation Army style brass band situation, and you've got lots of cornets, and then you've got alto horns, you've got tenor horns, you've got baritone horn, and then you've got some maybe a couple of euphoniums and maybe a couple of B flat basses at the low end as well. So you've got all of those different sounds to deal with. And so complementary EQ is going to be really important, and not to mention also trombones as well are going to feature in a brass band. So so complementary EQ is going to help you. And if it's a brass band situation that you're talking about, maybe it's a little bit hymn-like or something like that, then your compression is going to be light. You're not going to be going crazy with compression. You're not going to be doing lots of fast attack compression. Or, you don't want anything really, really grabby. You want something that's going to be quite light and transparent. Some maybe optical compressors are going to be your thing. And then, only looking for a couple of dB, 3 at the most dB of gain reduction if you're going to compress. But by and largely, I try not to compress. Certainly a brass band situation, I really don't want to compress too much at all, if any. I'll maybe do a little bit of mixed bus compression, or bus compression, something like that. So I hope that those help you, Mac, if you're still here. I don't know whether you are, but if you're not, then certainly check back in on the replay. We are 8 minutes over time, and I need to go back down to the bottom of the screen and just check what's going down. What have I missed? Kyle says, I'm going to miss everyone, but only because the scope on my rifle is broken. Kyle, that's hilarious. That is really, really good. That's very funny. Martin's got to go. That's cool. Well, I'm going to be wrapping up very shortly anyway, but I'm just wanting to check if I've missed anything whilst I was answering Mac's question. I don't even know if he's here. It doesn't look like he's in the show, but that's okay. So I'm going to wrap it up here, and I'm going to say, guys, I want to say a very, very big thank you to everybody for coming out to the show tonight. I really appreciate it, and I will next be on Songwriting Simplified, which this week will not be on Wednesday. Jonny Geib is not here tonight, and this is probably going to be the first he hears of it. So Jonny, if you're watching this on the replay, can we please move Songwriting Simplified this week to maybe Thursday? Check with both of us for confirmation on this, folks. I'm going to see Steely Dan on Wednesday night, so I don't think I'll be back in time for the show, because I'll be coming back from Glasgow. The show finishes at 10:30, so I may get at that time of the night. I might get back in time, but I can't promise it. So I'll need to talk to Jonny and see what he wants to do. But it may not be Songwriting Simplified on Wednesday this week. It may be Thursday. So keep an eye on the Songwriting Simplified page and the HST pages and groups and that kind of stuff, and we'll put something out to let you know when it is. But that'll be my next appearance, and then of course we'll be back around for another episode of Sunday Night Live. Just to say, I did say that I was going to announce some stuff, and one of the things I'm going to announce is I'm going to be doing a mixing series where I'm going to mix this song that we've been listening to tonight from scratch. So I mixed this 3 years ago, and although the mix is really great, I really like it. I'm still very happy with it. I think it'd be really cool if we just zero everything out and we start again. And this time you guys can come along for the ride and you can watch how I mix and how I mix this particular song. I'm very familiar with it, but I am going to try and approach this with fresh ears. So it's going to be a weekly thing. So we'll do a weekly episode on different sections of the mix as we go. So watch out for that. I think I'm going to be starting that this week, and I'm going to try and maybe set up a Dropbox folder and make the stems available for this. So if you are up for that, please do drop me an email at johnny@johnnylipshamstudios.co.uk. Send me an email there if you are up for this and you would like the stems to Paper Deity. The more responses I get that are positive, that people want the stems to this song so they can mix along with me, all the better. And I'll make those available. But if there's a lack of response on the stems front, then I would just do the series anyway and hope that you guys get something educational out of it, and at least you'll get to see how I work. If that piques your interest or intrigues you, how I actually go about a mix, then this series will be for you. All right, and on that note, folks, I will say a very, very big thank you to everybody for coming, and I wish you all a very good night. Good night.
On the 13th floor, one more sad life crashes, broken by the yearn for more and more. Another spin of the wheel, roll off the dice or ace on the turn. You beg, borrow or steal or trade your soul for bands to burn. From blue bust, make it a thrill. It can steal your life, dominate your goals, make a trouble and strife. Seek another soul against little paper deity. Let's go and flash the plastic, all on hot girls and wheels. Let's do something drastic. In the morning we'll never feel. Where were you on Black Wednesday? Stood for hours outside the Northern Rock. Still hungover from Tuesday.